Yes, I do have a very broad definition of what I think oral history is. I think in the case of an artist, the artist may have painted or created the object, 20, 30, 40, 50 years before. So I'm interested in not only in the piece of work and how it was created, but I'm interested in what led to the creation of that work. What were the influences, what was the education that lay behind that? And then I'm interested in why the gallery wanted to acquire that particular piece of work at that time. What did it say about the artist? So for this project which I mentioned at Tate, we have interviews with the artists themselves, but also with the gallery, the people who worked at the gallery who made the decision about purchasing the piece. And we also have interviews with the dealer, the art dealer who represented the artist. So I'm interested in the journey from the birth of the artist to the art piece being in the gallery. And oral history is a perfect way of charting that journey, particularly if you use a life story, because you can understand the influences in the context as well as the actual art piece itself. So I think you're right, I do have a very inclusive view of what oral history is, but I think that's very important to the survival of oral history. If it becomes bunkered in one particular type of study, in one particular type of methodology, then I think it weakens our opportunities as oral historians, and also it weakens our methodology. Because I think you can use oral history as a methodology in many different disciplines, and I think that's its strength, actually.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense, but I got the impression that it was a contemporary art exhibition.
It was a, sorry?
It was a contemporary art exhibition, so that was... okay.
Well, they're living artists, and they're not all living artists, yes. But near, recently dead artists, where we have oral history. Yeah.
I have something actually to say about this question. That during the Documenta exhibition, the Documenta 14 in Athens, which is a contemporary art exhibition, there was one installation by indigenous artist from Canada, Boddick, it was his name, and he died during the, he passed away during the installation and so on. So the installation had two parts, and the one part had to be taken back to its community, like a present for the death of their leader and who was also the artist, and to pass, and it had to pass from Kassel, from the other city that shared the exhibition, the actual exhibition. So in the middle of the exhibition time, like the one part of the exhibition left, so the place was empty. So there, the curators decided to put an sound installation with this story. I mean, this explained many things, and I think it's like part of what you're saying.
It's a really good example, thank you.
Βλέπω πολλά χέρια, αλλά η Δήμητρα ήταν πιο πριν και μετά πάμε από εκεί, από εκεί.
Thanks for this great stimulating talk. What I would like to ask is, do you think that when someone prepares interviews for the purposes of an exhibition, should follow the same methodology as when we prepare interviews for research projects?
That's a really good question. I have to say I would like more museums to make use of archives that already exist. But there is a tendency for museums to, we've got to do this exhibition on whatever it is, let's go and get some oral history. And often what they do is they get little clips and things just so they put it on the wall. Now, I think better museums understand now that if you think it through better and you do longer interviews, it creates a body of material that you can use again in the future, so that it's not so reactive. But you're right, there was a temptation, initially at least, just to grab quotes and not to do the broader context. But certainly in the UK that's changed now. I think museums understand that there's a very limited way of working, and that it doesn't help you next time you want that clip again. You know, you've got to go and get it again, you know, because they don't often keep clips. Whereas there's a temptation when you do a longer interview, invest more time in it, you archive it, it becomes a resource for the museum. So that's changed a bit, but it still goes on. And obviously journalists are guilty of that as well to a certain degree. They have a programme to make, they get little bits of what they want quite quickly, and then they use it, and it often removed from the broader context. I think if we've learned anything as oral historians the last sort of 20, 30 years, it's the importance of the context. It's what we were saying earlier about the context of the researcher as well as the context of the interviewee, and I think that it's really important to remember that.
I just want to add here that we might also remember this famous article with the title "Learning to Listen," because it shows how somebody who is doing an interview for an exhibition might be distracted from what she's actually hearing, because she thinks of the exhibition, of the final result that she has to present for the exhibition.
Listening in stereo.
Yes, yes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for this very inspiring talk. I was wondering if there is still any problems when applying in the relationship with the museum, with the curators, with the historian. If there is still challenges that people have to face when they have to form an argument that we should add this.
Yeah, I said I was going to talk more about art curators, didn't I? I think art curators have been I think social history curators have naturally been friends of oral history, and many of them are oral historians themselves, they collect oral history. It's been more challenging, I think, for those curators who are used to working with art objects. So we were really lucky with the Tate Britain exhibition, is that we had a curator who had very different views from many of her colleagues about the role of the artist's voice in the gallery, because the Tate doesn't have a good track record of being able to hear the voices. The guides that you get are often curator-led. You might get the odd little clip, but it doesn't forefront the voice of the artist, and it's a deliberate interpretive decision that they make, not for the visitor not to hear the voice. Now I think that's beginning to change with the younger generation of curators, art curators, who have come through art education at a later stage. So the curator we were working with, interestingly, was Italian. She had an Italian background, so she had a different tradition of art education than the British art curators that we were dealing with. I think that made a big difference. So I think I think the attitude is changing. There's still a lot of curators who think oral history is a lot of hard work and not worth the effort, where they've got all these objects and all they have to do is put labels on them and put them on the shelf, you know. But I think those that understand the way in which, as I was saying earlier, in which it can engage the community, involve people, there's lots of additional benefits, and that I think that realisation is now working through museum training. So, you know, I was a museum curator in the early 80s. It was really hard work, but it's not. You know, there's a lot of awareness now of oral history that there wasn't at the time. It was just changing then. So there's still people who don't like using oral history under any circumstances, but I think gradually that the profession is changing.
Thank you very much. I was thinking, Mr. Pett, thinking of Lynn Abrams' attempt to explore the history of oral history. This term you're commenting on, including all the senses,
Yes.
and some.
Yes.
Is there a term, and an oral historian has to be somehow a public historian in order to be accessible, or it is two different tasks? We collect the interviews and then there is a different task of the public historian.
It's a very good question. I think all of us that collect evidence about the past are going to use it in one way or another. I think all of us who are historians, we want to understand the past better, so we're collecting it in order to understand. Maybe we're publishing material. So you could argue in many ways that we are all using it publicly in different ways. Some people use it more than others. But to take your example of the public historian in the US and the Australian definition, I think oral history is a part of a broader thing that they're doing, which is they're interpreting memory material, which isn't just oral history. It may be diaries, it may be photographs. So it's more holistic in its use of objects of which oral history is a part. So I think oral historians are public historians, but all public historians aren't oral historians. They maybe use oral history. But to pick up your point about emotion, I think that's another way in which you can convey to an audience in a way that an object can't. When you hear a voice and you hear the emotion in a voice, maybe with the object that has a particular relevance. I'm thinking of I went to the Hiroshima Museum in Japan, and that's very emotive, the way that you hear the voices of some of the survivors with some of the objects. So I think we all do collect emotions, and conveying those emotions is a very important part of what we should be doing in public history contexts.
Anybody else? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you all.
And we
See you
will
tomorrow.
see you tomorrow. What was the time tomorrow?
9.